anyways, Chris got called into a last minute meeting and was not able to get over from the Hill, but I'm thrilled that David Dorfman's here from the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, the HISGAC as it's known, and then providing an executive branch perspective, Jason Lim from TSA and DHS, who serves as our Identity Management Capability Manager and has been doing some really interesting work, particularly as it comes to mobile driver's licenses, is here today. So just to frame things, a lot of things happened last year. Some significant legislative action on digital identity, both in terms of a bigger bill we almost got passed, and then also Congress tasking NIST with creating new guidance for federal, state, and local agencies looking to provide digital identity and attribute validation services. On the state side, we're starting to see a number of states take the plunge in terms of launching mobile driver's license apps that can be a digital counterpart to the plastic IDs we've been using. Now we've got a new Congress underway. It's a very new Congress, a little different than what we were looking at last year. And so I wanted to talk about what could we actually get done this year, and what could we be talking about a year from now. So, anyways, let me ask both David and Jason, introduce yourselves and talk sort of about the role you play, on these topics.
Good afternoon. Thanks for inviting me, Jeremy. My name is Jason Lim. I'm the Identity Management Capability Manager. I know it's a mouthful, but kind of oversee all the identity management related functions at TSA. Try to synthesize a strategy, kind of prioritize resources and whatnot. One thing about TSA is that TSA actually happens to be the largest consumer of identities for an in-person presentation use case, right? Every day, because we have to check the identities of 2.5 million passengers to our checkpoints. So that's kind of our use case that we're trying to solve.
And hey, I'm David Dorfman. I understand you heard earlier from the House side perspective on the Improving Digital Identity Act. I'll be speaking to it from the Senate perspective. And I mean, honestly, it's great to be here today. These are the kinds of rooms where action happens. And as Jeremy alluded to, we've been working hard on the Senate side, marked up in HISGAC, and we're looking forward to keep pushing forward on this. So thank you all.
So let me throw an opening question to you, David. You and working with Senator Sinema and Chris, with Senator Lummis teamed up on a bill last year. Talk a little bit about the legislation. Where'd we end up last year?
Yeah, well, it's kind of remarkable. Warp speed by congressional standards. Marked up unanimously on a bipartisan basis on the Senate side, the Improving Digital Identity Act, and marked up and passed out of House, well, now COA, but formerly CORE, the Oversight Committee. I mean, truly remarkable. And as Jeremy mentioned, this close to being signed into law. And really, I think that speaks to the uniquely bipartisan and critical nature of this issue. I mean, this is not some abstract academic exercise, some thought piece. This is real. This is real people's lives. I mean, I think there's four things that, well, there are many things, but four really important things to think about in the context of this legislation and digital identity efforts writ large. Stopping identity theft, stopping this rampant benefits fraud we saw. I mean, protecting taxpayers, frankly, enhancing people's privacy and their civil liberties, right? This is privacy enhancing, not privacy reducing. And also, it's common sense. I mean, honestly, sometimes you wonder what decade, what century we're in when we're handing out these lines of numbers to supposedly verify who someone says they are. I mean, it's not secure. I mean, it's not security, it's insanity. This is not a rational way in the 21st century when any hacker worth their salt has that social security number, that driver's license number to be verifying people with really sensitive transactions. So we're working on hard on the Hill to fix that. And I really believe, we're going to get this done.
So we came close last year, and I know Congress is just starting to get organized right now in 2023. The question I keep getting is, what's going to happen next? Does the bill get reintroduced? Do you all take a different twist on things? Anything you can share in terms of thoughts on that?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I'm here to speak on behalf of myself and not, not the principals. But what I will say is we came really close and we have a really promising path. And I think if you look at the landscape of this issue and we continue educating people, making sure people understand how important this issue is, how it relates to everyday people's lives, we'll get it done.
Jason, you've been focused a lot more on the implementation side. And although your work was actually guided heavily by legislation that was passed in 2020, the Real ID Modernization Act, which, tell me if I don't describe it quite properly, but it basically stated, among other things, that for Real ID compliance purposes, an ID does not need to be a plastic card. It could also be a digital credential. So can you talk a little bit about that law, how it's guiding the work you're doing, and also how it's going?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Jeremy. So yeah, that law said the TSA Mod Act basically said that Real ID has to be MDL compliant, but we don't know what that means, right? Because MDL, Real ID was written with a physical ID in mind. So what does that mean? So it's up to us, and we are trying to figure out what that means from a Real ID and MDL perspective. Do you have that slide by any chance, Jeremy?
I think we do.
Yeah, so this is basically our worldview in a nutshell on how we are thinking about this issue, right? So you have the issuing authority, which is from an MDL perspective, as an example, are the DMVs, right? The states. Then you have the credential user, iPhone holder or, Google phone holder or Samsung, right? Then you have the relying party. For us, we are the relying party for in-person presentation, right? And that's defined by ISO standard 18013-5. Everybody here is familiar with that. And that's what we're building on, because that's the only standard that really defines the protocols for a in-person attended use case, which TSA is. Having said that, if you want to define the whole ecosystem to ensure that Real ID MDL can be trusted, secure, privacy-friendly, address the equity, as well as interoperability, you have to start thinking and defining all the other nodes and the legs of this triangle, right? So these are the foundational kind of standards that's really guiding our thinking around how we want to define these to ensure that all those four key components, right? Security, privacy, equity, and interoperability are met and in an open and equitable way for everybody to play in. Having said that, I know a lot of people here are also waiting for the publication of Part 7, which would define the non-attended use case. TSA is not as big, as large in that use case space. We have some marginal use cases, but right now we're focusing on Part 7, the attended use case. So basically, Jeremy, in short, this set of standards and guidance documents and kind of derivatives from these will really inform our thinking and eventual, Real ID regulations, requirements that define what an MDL, that's Real ID compliance, really means to us.
Thanks. Now, this is a helpful slide, I think, to show how the different standards fit together. Can you talk a little bit about the progress you're making so far? I know you've had some pretty high-profile rollouts in a couple states and airports. Talk a little bit more about what we've seen last year and what you expect to see this year.
So last year, we were able to launch with Apple Wallet provision MDL from 3 states. So that's Colorado, Arizona went first. That was followed by Maryland. That was Colorado's. At 3 different locations, right? 3 different airports. We're limiting them to pre-check customers at this point because really we're still in kind of a testing pilot stages. And we are using the ISO standard 18013-5, and we built a reader that can actually consume the information that we need from those devices, from those wallets, right? And do our business, identity security screening on our end, just as we would with a physical ID. This year, you'll see more states launching, multiple states launching with what's exciting with multiple vendors, right? We have different implementations to MDL. So it's not just Apple or Google or Samsung with the MDL provision natively to their wallets. but also third-party apps or other alternative, right? Our only kind of qualification so far on that is that we want to be able to consume using Part 5, right? Because that's the only kind of standard that works for us in this space. But other than that, we're agnostic on the implementation of the MDL or the platform that comes from.
And I think, can you talk a little bit more about, so obviously you work for the TSA, so you really care about what happens when I go to the gate. But there's there's a whole other set of use cases around in-person presentment of a mobile driver's license instead of a plastic card driver's license. It could be getting into a bar or at the liquor store. I guess there's some other things besides the TSA and alcohol that should matter too. But maybe getting pulled over by law enforcement and I could present something over. But it's all about things that are, wouldn't it be nice if you could use the digital credential on your phone rather than have to carry the plastic card? There's a whole other separate set of use cases where these two standards that are in draft get to, which really gets to a lot of what we've been talking about in this event today, which is what I would call the remote identity proofing conundrum. How do you actually prove who you are online when you're not face to face, but you need a more reliable credential that could, be, say, cryptographically signed and tied back to the originating issuer? So two questions. One, how would you characterize the work on the standards there that are in draft? And then the second question is this going to be a TSA-led effort to figure this out, or are there other parts of government that need to coordinate as well?
Yeah, there's definitely, hopefully, there's other parts of the government that's working together with us on this. So that really goes to the provisioning and updates, right? That's the leg that you're talking about. It's remote kind of self-enrollment. I think that's what we want to get to. And how do we create a set of standard requirements and certification, testing, assurance that we know that it works the way it is, right? So MDL, provisioning your own MDL onto your own device does touch on that, right? And will be guided by the 63-4 part, revision 4 that NIST just put out as it kind of matures and finalizes, as well as 23220. There are overlapping aspects of it that kind of both kind of speaks to the provisioning updates leg. Having said that, there are 3 key components that you see in that provisioning activity. They're foundational. One is you have to authenticate the legitimacy of the physical ID that you start with, right? You take a picture of your driver's license front and back, or you open up the chip on your passport, for example. So you have to authenticate the physical ID from which that kind of trust derives from. Then you do a one-to-one off the source photo against a live selfie, right? That's usually what happens. Then the liveness, has to be a live person, right? There's a lot of presentation attacks that happens. So how do you ensure that the face that you're taking a live selfie on is actually live? So we are very excited that we are partnering with DHS Science and Technology Directorate with Director Arun Bemuri, in which he is going to kind of host a rally. He announced it last year, right? In which we test each one of those functions. So basically, authenticating the physical ID remotely using just your phone's camera, doing a one-to-one, and doing a liveness. So and that's the first time that I think that we're able to kind of baseline the performance of those functions and really compare that against the claims that's made by a lot of vendors in the industry, so that we have a baseline by which to judge the performance and the maturity of those functionalities.
Thanks. And I want to, talk about, some of the broader, essentially, I think, get back to the legislation and its call for, what I would characterize as a whole of government approach to digital identity, in that there's, a lot of what I would call pockets of excellence happening right now. The work you're leading in TSA with mobile driver's license for in-person presentment, DHS working, also with NIST on, the standards for what will happen for some of the digital use cases. Separately, we've got, even within DHS, and we heard at the Fed ID Forum a few months ago about what CIS, Center for Immigration Services, is doing to issue credentials using the W3C's verifiable credential standard, which is different from MDLs. And, for government services, we have login.gov creating a service where they're trying to figure out identity proofing, and then we have SSA offering attribute validation services, but only for financial services. If I'm applying for credit, I can match, is there really a Jeremy Grant with this date of birth and SSN who's not dead? but not safe. I'm trying to get into login.gov, although there was an announcement in Politico a couple of weeks ago that maybe they're going to have a new reg to update that. And you can see the list goes on and on. And this is maybe a question for you, David, from the Hill side. Are you all seeing a coordinated approach right now across the executive branch to tackling what I would call the digital identity challenge writ large with a broader strategy?
Well, I think the question you pose speaks directly to the need for the Improving Digital Identity Act. I mean, fundamentally, this task force is going to bring together all those agencies and many others you talked about, as well as the private sector, non-governmental stakeholders, basically everyone who has a stake in this conversation, from victims of identity theft to agencies who may not be thinking about this at the moment, to vendors, to technology experts, everyone who has a stake in this conversation. We need to get these stakeholders in the same room because there are fundamental technological questions, frankly, that we have to agree upon, right? Standards require cooperation. Standards-based architectures require cooperation. We need to be together in the same room. We need to be hashing this out to make sure those principles up on the slide, if it's still up, yeah, it's still up, to make sure those principles are upheld. And look, the legislation, even where it stands today, I think we've been playing a really significant role in making those conversations start to happen across government, right? People in the executive branch are aware that this is no longer a backwater. Congress is paying attention. Digital identity is finally being talked about in the way it needs to be. And, that in itself can be a trigger for action.
So let me ask, I mean, politically, this touches on a lot of issues where it seems like there's opportunities for good bipartisan cooperation to build on what we saw last year. I think everybody wants to reduce cybercrime and fraud. You don't get a lot of people going saying, no, I'm for more cybercrime. Everybody wants to seem to help people protect their privacy. How they want to do that, maybe they have different ideas, but the objective is sort of high level. There's a good agreement. Everyone seems to want to make digital transactions easier. Everyone, I think, wants these kind of tools to be easily available to anyone. We still don't have agreement on how to move forward. So where do you think more work needs to be done over the next year?
Well, first, if I may, I'm going to respectfully disagree a little bit. Not everyone agrees we should reduce cybercrime, enhance privacy, make the world a better, happier place by passing the Improving Digital Identity Act. Let me tell you who some of those people are. The government of the People's Republic of China, Vladimir Putin. I don't think Kim Jong-un's too big of a fan of our legislation. I mean, I could go on. Iran, that guy who scammed your grandmother. All these, disparate actors are united in opposing this common sense bipartisan legislation. All jokes aside, look, obviously, I'm really proud that the Improving Digital Identity Act passed the Senate Homeland Security Committee on a unanimous bipartisan basis last year. That's huge. That does not happen every day. And I think that's a testament to that, yes, there are some differences, but we can work them out. And I think we can replicate that success and move the ball even further forward. I'd also just, add that, well, I think all of us in this room have to get that message across. As I mentioned earlier, this is about enhancing privacy. This bill promotes civil liberties. It makes people's lives easier, and it protects some really vulnerable folks. Look, I love meeting with all of you guys. I've had some great meetings with many of you. Keep them coming. I love talking to you guys. But one of the most impactful meetings I've had on this legislation and on this topic is with a woman who was a victim of identity theft that was completely preventable with the common sense solutions we're advocating for. I mean, she lost a good portion of her life savings. And all she wants is Congress or the executive branch to do something to make sure someone doesn't have to go through, I believe the congressman earlier mentioned, just the hassle of calling your credit card company. For a lot of folks, it's a lot more than the hassle of calling your credit card company. It's years of trying to climb out of the financial hole you found yourself in when your money has disappeared overseas. We gotta come together. We gotta stop that.
Thanks. I wanted to flag, so earlier this week, so by the way, for those who missed it in December, the Better Identity Coalition published a new version of its policy blueprint. This one focused on state policymakers, looking at a lot of new governors coming in, new state legislators coming in. We've had some good attention, some good inbounds from folks in a number of states who've been asking about it. We were really excited in that we saw there was a hearing in the state of Washington that happened on Monday on Senate Bill 5105, which would require the Washington State Department of Licensing, the DOL, to begin issuing digital driver's license to everyone by, I think it's about a year and a half from now, September of 2024. And the big takeaway from the hearing was, it was a little disappointing in that everybody said, we're really excited about the potential of these driver's licenses that could be digital, but they don't want to move forward in the state because they don't see that there's standards in place yet in the US for digital identity. And I mean, Jason, I kind of wanted to get your take there. You've talked about, there's a few states who've been leaning forward and are piloting this right now. Are states in a position where they can move, or should they be hanging back?
Yeah, well, so there are a lot of states that are already moving, right? So they're known and not known. So, I mean, that's each state's choice. But having said that, going back to what David just mentioned, as well as you, Jeremy. So as the largest kind of consumer of physical IDs, right? So driver's license, as a centralized and largest consumer, what you realize is that that physical ID ecosystem is fragmented. And, and fragmentation is not good for security, privacy, equity, or interoperability. So it's TSA, we're finding issues, right? Kind of the negative impacts of a fragmented ecosystem kind of means, right, to address all that. So one of our strategic interests, I think as a whole, as an industry and as government that, especially need help on maybe, is that we want to make this ecosystem of digital ID cohesive and intact so that, while it's open to competition, innovation, but the security and privacy, equity, and interoperability of that ecosystem remains cohesive and intact and kind of safeguard what you just mentioned, David, really at the bottom line, the quality of life of our citizens and the security, it's in our national interest to do so.
Thanks. Well, let me get into, I know when Andrew Shikyar was up here from FIDO before, he made a bunch of predictions for 2023. So I'm wondering, I guess starting with you, Jason, what does the mobile driver's license ecosystem look like a year from now? What are we going to be talking about at this event in 2024 in terms of what's happened over the last year? I realize I wasn't on the list. I'm getting a little freelancing a little on my questions.
No. Trying to be, trying to calibrate without going overboard. Basically, I think we'll have much better idea what real IT compliant MDL means across the whole ecosystem, across all these three different legs. And we'll also be, what's really exciting is that we'll see the emergence of several examples of really a private label digital IDs, right? Derived credentials, we call it, but not just driver's licenses, state issued or government issued IDs, but private entities may issue the same, a really trustworthy ID that leverages the kind of the foundational ecosystem and the standards that we are defining for MDL. So very excited to see, those innovation come up in the next year.
To talk a little bit more about that last point, the vision being that because we have a standard, there's a lot of different entities that could actually issue the MDL so long as they're abiding by the standard. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I think that's still the idea. The issuing authority does not necessarily have to be just government only, right? So if you define through an open standard system a way that you can secure and protect privacy and equity and interoperability, you already have a lot of entities stepping up and trying to issue an ID, that can actually be more trustworthy or that can be specialized for different use cases. So we were excited to see that.
David, predictions on your side. What are we talking about a year from now?
Well, for better or for worse, Congress tends to operate more in weeks than years. But
Sometimes a week can feel like a year when you're working in Congress.
Tell me about it. But look, I can tell you what the immediate term needs to hold. This conversation we're having today, we need to be beating this drum anywhere and everywhere we can. You know, ultimately, this legislation and this digital identity effort we've undertaken, it's not requiring anyone to do anything. It's about empowering states, empowering individuals to make choices if they want to make them that will enhance privacy, enhance security, and make our lives better and more secure. So let's make people understand this is not just an esoteric issue. We need to address this. It cannot wait. I mean, there's this article about, you know, APT41, Chinese hacking group, that literally stole COVID benefits. Totally preventable. Completely not necessary that could happen if we got our Digital Identity Act together. That's bipartisan. Okay, if that doesn't trigger action, I don't know. But we need to make sure people hear about that, make sure people understand. I mean, raise your hand if you like the idea of the Chinese government stealing benefits that belong to the American people. I'm glad no one raised their hand because I'd have to call the FBI. I hate to make it interactive and turn this on people, but just listen to these statistics. I mean, anyone have a guess at how many Americans were impacted by data breaches in 2021?
You missed when they released the 2022 data breach report this morning. So,
oh man, I should have been tuned in. Well, here, the floor is yours.
A lot.
293 million in 21. Mind-boggling. We got to get these stats. We got to get these stories out there being talked about so people know that this bill needs to be passed now. And hopefully a year from now, you know, we do that education now, we'll be in a good place.
Thanks. I know we've got a few minutes left. Jason's got a hard stop just before 4, but we've got time for a couple questions if anybody has.
Yeah, quick question. So one of the technologies used to secure this is biometrics, and as a biometric vendor, one of the challenges that customers have right now is the patchwork of state laws, the BIPA, like in Illinois, CCPA, California. How does if the Improving Digital Identity Act gets a second life here, what is it going to do to address that? You know, to ensure some uniformity, or is this going to throw it into the federal versus state court problem? So can you make a comment on that?
Yeah, certainly. Well, look, the Improving Digital Identity Act is not in the game of picking winners or losers in this space. You know, Congress should not be, in a lot of cases, deciding what the best technical standard or you know, a technical tool to use maybe 10 years from now might be, right? Statute is more or less forever. But I think something we really that's helping drive the conversation behind the legislation is that it ensures that whatever technology is deployed, there is oversight, right? The American people, you know, everyone's constituents deserve to know that whatever tools are being used, you know, experts in the government, NGOs, are taking a hard look and making sure the principles we all agree on are embedded in those technologies. So I think that's a really important part of this conversation. It's certainly a part of this conversation that applies to biometrics, and I think it's something that we need to continue talking about and is definitely addressed by the legislation.
And I'll just say, you know, on that point, I mean, what the bill really does is, you know, requires the White House to set up a task force to figure out how to tie these different initiatives together and address this problem holistically. There is an issue, though, which is whether it's federal privacy legislation and does that include biometrics or not. That's not happening right now. And there are some people who thought we came close last year. I actually don't think it was that close. I don't think it's going to happen this year. And so my personal view is, I don't know if you're going to see anything that's going to stop the proliferation of state laws on this topic, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that is going to preclude progress in the digital identity front. I think there's ways you can narrowly scope things in terms of what we might see from a whole of government effort that isn't going to really trip some of those barriers over there. But it's definitely something that all it takes is one state to act, and then you have a whole new set of legal challenges, and that could be a little kinky.
Yeah, and I just do want to be clear, when I was saying we're directly on point there, I was speaking to, the technologies. Privacy, that's a different committee, a different conversation.
So just to add to that, though, that's a great question. For us, that question is very salient because it's a photo ID, right? So even a digital ID is a photo ID, which means CSA has to compare the ID photo to live face. So we're trying to automate that process using facial recognition technology, as I think I'm aware. So we are very mindful of the privacy and the civil rights implication of that, and I think we have been building, a lot of safeties, a lot of policy wrapper that kind of addresses those considerations, at least for our use cases.
Any other questions? All right. Well, I think I can let you go a couple minutes early, and knowing you've actually, both of you got other things you have to still do today, that hopefully helps us make up a little bit of time. Jason, David, really appreciate you both coming today and speaking to everybody, and look
you.
forward to working with you across the year.
Thank you so much.